Video number 3 is about scatter plots and correlation, where we will find the correlation coefficient using an example. I have collected data, in this case absences and final grade, from a sample of 7 students enrolled in my previous course. Now there's something interesting with this table. Notice if there's a relationship between being absent in class and final grade. I will pause for a bit and give you a chance to think. What I noticed, the students with a lot of absences, in this case the one that has 18 absences, has a grade of 37, while the student that has just 7 absences has a grade of 75. We also have a student with 1 absent, and this student simply aced the course with a 92. Can you come up with a conclusion? Well, in my case, the student with a lot of absences, they seem to have lower grades than those that have fewer absences. Do you notice the same thing? Well, we're going to use correlation coefficient to determine if in fact there's a relationship between these two variables. Do you remember this formula from the previous video? Well, I'm going to show you how to break it down into simple steps that are easy to remember. Now, before we get to do that, we're going to start with completing the following table. Notice absences will be our x value, so in other words, it's going to be the independent variable, while final grades will be the y value or dependent variable. We are trying to determine basically if being absent in class will somehow affect your final grade in the course. Now we got 3 columns here. We got xy, x squared, and y squared. Xy simply means to multiply, so we're going to do that. We're simply going to multiply each number. That means take 3 multiply with 87 to get 267. 10 times 63, that's 630. Then 92, 666, 525, 513, 410. X squared, that means we're going to take each x number and raise it to the second power. So 3 squared, that's 9. 10 squared is 100. 1 squared is 1. 18 squared is 324. 7 squared is 49. 9 squared is 81. 5 squared is 25. Now we're going to find the y squared, so take 89 squared. Remember to do this with the help of a calculator. Take 63 and square it, that's 3,969. Sorry about that. 92 squared, that's 8,464. Like I said, take each of the y values and star square them with the help of a calculator. 5,625, 3,249, and 6,724. When you're done with each one or completing this table, we're going to need to find the sum. Why the sum? So let's take at the previous slide. Do you see how we have that E sigma symbol? Like I said, that big E represents sigma, and in other words, it's telling us to find the sum of column xy, the sum of just column y, x, the sum of just column y, and so on. So let's do that. The sum of the x's is just 53. Let's see if I can fit this in here. Okay, that's what I was afraid of. Sum of the y squared is 495. Sum of the xy, 3,103. Sum of the x squared is 589. sum of the white square is 37,321. Now, if you remember pretty well, this is the same formula we're going to work with. Now, the next step that we're going to do is we're going to break it down into 3 sections. This section at the top, we're going to call it number 1. This one at the bottom is going to be section number 2. And this one is going to be section number 3. Okay? So our next step is going to be to substitute into smaller formulas, starting with that one. That's the one that's exactly section number 1. And we're going to substitute with some values. If you remember pretty well, n is just the sample size. As I mentioned before, we had 7 students. Now, you can also go back to the video and try to get all the values because we know n is 7. We're substituting. The sum of the xy is 3,103. And we're going to take these two numbers, multiply them. Then we're going to subtract with the sum of x, which was 53, times 495. When we do this, you should get an answer of negative 4,514. Let's look at the next part. That's the second part. For the second part, we still have the n7. We're going to multiply it by the sum of the x squared, which was 589, and subtract the sum of x, which is 53, raised to the second power. When we do this, we're going to get an answer of 1,314. For number 3, we have n is still 7. We're going to multiply this by the sum of the y squared, which is 37,321, and subtract the sum of y, which was 495 to the second power. When you do this, type it into your calculator, you're going to get 16,222. You can pause this video at any moment, get your calculators and work out just to make sure that we're getting the same answers. After you have 1, 2, and 3 completed, remember our correlation coefficient? Well, I just broke it down into 1 divided by 2 times 1 divided by the square root of 2 times 3. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to replace that 1 with a negative 4,514. Then we're going to divide by the square root of 1,314, that's 2, multiplied by 16,222. When you input all of these values into the calculator and we round our R value to just 3 decimal places, you're going to get negative correlation of 0.978. And as we discussed before in a previous video, what does it mean to get a correlation of negative 0.978? Well, if you remember correctly, our R value has to be between negative 1 and 1. And if we have a number or correlation coefficient that is either close to negative 1 or close to 1, we have a very strong relationship. It simply means that if a student's absent a lot of times, then eventually that student will have a lower grade than those students that are not absent as much. So our correlation coefficient here is just a strong negative. Linear correlation.